The night Sadie Calloway crawled into my tent, I had spent 11 months telling myself that what I felt for her was just what happened when you spent enough time with one person. That proximity creates something that looks like love if you squint at it the wrong way. I had been squinting pretty hard. I was wrong about the squinting. My name is Daniel Hargrove. I was 31, a structural engineer for a mid-sized firm in Portland, which means I spent most of my professional life figuring out exactly how much weight something could hold before it gave. Stress loads, tension points, the specific moment an element stops functioning as designed and starts functioning as a liability. I had gotten very good at that. Better with buildings than with myself. Sadie and I had been best friends for 6 years. 6 years is 2,190 days, more or less. I had spent somewhere north of 2,000 of them talking myself out of the same conclusion. She was not someone who announced herself. That was the first thing you had to understand about her. She walked into rooms without theater, without the particular performance some people give when they need the room to know they have arrived. She just arrived. She noticed things. The way your voice changed when you were tired of talking about something. The specific coffee order you had switched to 6 months ago and never mentioned switching to. The part of a conversation where you needed someone to stop asking questions and just sit with you. She noticed and then she acted on what she noticed, quietly, without making it a thing. I had watched her do this for 6 years. I had been the beneficiary of it for 6 years. And I had spent 6 years telling myself that what I felt about it was gratitude. It was not only gratitude. I knew that. I had known it for a while. But knowing something and doing something about it are two different calculations, and the second one involves variables the first one doesn't. What you stand to lose, how much the current arrangement means to you, whether the thing you want is worth the risk of the thing you have. I had run that math many times. I had never liked the answer enough to act on it. The problem specifically was this. I had watched what happened when something went wrong between two people who were also friends, and I had seen which part survived and which part didn't. My previous relationship had ended in the slow, undramatic way that some relationships end. Not with a fight, not with a revelation, just with two people who had quietly stopped being curious about each other. After that, I had not been lonely exactly. I had been careful. There is a difference, though it can be hard to locate from the inside. Sadie was my closest friend. The friendship was the architecture. I was not willing to do something to the architecture without being very certain about the load it could bear. I had been trying to calculate that load for years. The frustrating thing was that the number kept coming out too high to ignore and too uncertain to act on, and I had spent a long time in that particular in-between, which is not a comfortable place for an engineer to live. The camping trip was Sarah Chen's idea. Sarah was a mutual friend, the kind of organized person who plans group trips on shared spreadsheets and sends calendar invites with packing lists attached 3 weeks in advance. 6 of us, 3 days in the Cascades, end of September. Perfect weather window, she said, shoulder season, no crowds. She had researched the trailhead, the campsite, the projected precipitation. The spreadsheet had a color coding system. She was right about everything until the weather. We drove up on a Friday. 3 cars, coolers jammed with food that was too ambitious for a camp kitchen, somebody's playlist loud enough to be heard between vehicles at a stoplight. Sadie rode with me. She always rode with me on trips like this. It had never occurred to either of us to negotiate that arrangement, which says something, though I had not figured out yet exactly what it said. She had her feet up on my dashboard. She knew I hated this, she did it anyway. She had been doing it since we were 25. And she was reading aloud from a book about old maritime disasters, which she thought was entertaining car trip content, and which, honestly, I had to admit she was right about. The story involved a schooner off the coast of Nova Scotia and a crew that had made 17 separate navigational errors before the 14th of October 1892, and she kept stopping to editorialize in a way that was making it hard for me to pay attention to the highway. 17, she said. They had 17 chances to not be idiots. Some of those chances were probably less obvious in the moment. The moment where they tied the wrong knot and lost the anchor? She turned the page without looking up. That one was obvious. I'll note that for my own nautical career. You should. She set the book on her knee. I could feel her looking at me. You know what the worst part is? They all survived. The whole crew. Hypothermia, 2 days in a life raft, but they all made it. So the story isn't even tragic. It's just 17 bad decisions made by 17 men who lived long enough to tell people about them. That's almost worse. That's exactly worse. She picked up the book again. Okay, next chapter is about a Norwegian freighter. Can't wait, she read. I drove. The trees on either side of the highway got taller and closer. The radio faded. We didn't need it. We got to the campsite mid-afternoon, which gave us enough daylight to set up and still get a 2-hour hike in before dinner. The site was everything the spreadsheet had promised. Old-growth firs on 3 sides, a creek 30 yards downhill that you could hear from the fire ring, the kind of campsite that makes you feel like the outdoors is doing you a personal favor and asking nothing in return. The light came through the canopy at an angle that made everything look like a photograph someone had taken very carefully. We unloaded the cars. The 6 of us worked through the setup with the efficiency of people who had done this together before and knew whose job was what without discussing it. Sarah had a system. Mark respected the system. Jamie put the food cooler in the shade without being asked. Priya found the driest spot for the kitchen gear. It was the particular pleasure of a group that had spent enough time together that competence had become a natural language. Sarah and Mark took the north side, on the flats. Jamie and Priya took the spot near the creek, which had the best view but also the most rocks. That left me, Sadie, and our friend Owen. Owen had shown up with a 2-person tent and the extremely relaxed attitude of a man who had assumed this would resolve itself. I have a 3-person tent, I said. Great, Owen said, with the sincerity of someone who genuinely did not see a problem. Sadie can take Owen's tent, Sarah started. Or Sadie and Owen share your tent and you take Owen's, Priya said. Or, Sadie said, cutting through it, I'll take Owen's tent. You 2 share Daniel's. Owen looked at me. He had known about my feelings for Sadie for approximately 4 years, having pieced it together at a party through a series of observations he had once described as extremely obvious, buddy. He was a decent enough person not to say anything about it in front of everyone. He was not a decent enough person not to raise his eyebrows at me from behind Sadie's back. I ignored him. Works, I said. We finished setting up. We hiked the ridge, which was worth it. A view that made you stop talking mid-sentence. The kind of view that makes you remember the scale of things. We came back with tired legs and good appetites and the specific mood a long walk puts you in where everything feels a little more manageable than it did before. Dinner was good, the fire was better. By 9 o'clock the fire was going and the temperature had dropped enough that everyone had added a layer. The conversation moved the way it does around a good fire, one topic to another without destination, someone telling a story, someone else remembering a different version of the same story, long comfortable silences where nobody felt the need to fill them. Sarah told the one about the rental car in Colorado. Jamie did the voice for the park ranger, which he was not good at but committed to. Priya found a bag of marshmallows she had hidden in the bottom of her pack and pretended she had not planned this. Sadie sat across the fire from me. That was unusual. She usually sat next to me. But the seating had fallen out that way, and it wasn't the kind of thing you rearrange without making it a thing. So I watched her across the fire instead. The light did what firelight does to people's faces, and she had her knees pulled up and she was laughing at something Mark said, and I thought the thing I had been not thinking for a long time. I did not do anything about thinking it. I just let it exist for once, without immediately calculating its weight. By 10, it was starting to rain. Lightly at first, the kind of rain you can almost convince yourself isn't quite rain, just a thickening of the air. By 11, everyone had retreated to their tents. By midnight it was raining the way September in the Cascades rains when it decides it has been patient long enough. Steadily, evenly, with the commitment of something that had no intention of stopping. Owen was already asleep. He was one of those people, put his head down and that was it, out completely, like a switch. I had always found this both admirable and faintly alien. I lay in my sleeping bag listening to the sound of the rain on the fly, which was holding well, and the sound of the creek getting louder, and the particular thoughts that come at midnight in the dark when you are tired but not quite sleeping. I had been doing the calculation again, the one about Sadie. I had been running it in the background for months. What I felt, what she might feel, what the odds were, what the cost would be if I was wrong. I was an engineer. I did not like making structural decisions on incomplete data. But I was also starting to understand that there was no data set that was ever going to be complete enough, and that what I was doing by waiting for one was less like careful calculation and more like the 17 men on the Nova Scotia schooner, making one avoidable error after another and surviving to tell people about it. I was somewhere in the middle of this when I heard the zipper, not Owen's sleeping bag, the tent door. I sat up. Sadie came through the flap in a flannel shirt and wool socks, her hair damp at the edges where the rain had caught her in the few feet between the tents. She was carrying her sleeping bag under one arm, and her expression was equal parts irritated and something else that I could not immediately identify. "The corner seam on Owen's tent is leaking," she said. "Which corner?" "The back right one. It's not bad yet, but my sleeping bag is damp, and it's going to get worse." She looked around the tent. Owen was a geometric shape in his sleeping bag, entirely inert. "Is there room?" There was room. I moved my pack to the foot of the tent, and she lay out her bag on the far side of Owen, who did not stir even slightly, and settled in. For a while, neither of us said anything. The rain came down, the creak was audible. Owen breathed with the uncomplicated depth of someone who had never had a difficult feeling in his life. "Thank you," she said. "You don't have to thank me. I know." A pause. "I'm cold." I was looking at the ceiling of the tent, which is a thing you do when you are trying not to look at someone. "Move over," she said. She unzipped her bag and spread it over both of us like a blanket. She lay on her back, I lay on mine. Owen continued to be unconscious. The rain came down harder for a moment, then evened out. "You're quiet," she said. "It's 2 in the morning. You're a different kind of quiet." She paused. "You've been a different kind of quiet for a while." I did not say anything. "Daniel. I'm not going to push." Another pause. The quality of her silences was different from other people's silences. They had weight without being heavy. But I want you to know that if there's something you've been not saying, I'm not going to break. Something in my chest did a thing I did not have a precise term for. "Sadie," I said. "Yeah." "How long have you known that I had something I wasn't saying?" She considered this with the seriousness she gave things that deserved it. "Probably 4 years. There was a party at Mia's. You left early. And the way you said goodbye." She stopped. "I don't know. I just knew there was something." 4 years. 4 years she had known and had not said anything, and I had known for 6 and had not said anything, and we had collectively said nothing for the better part of a decade, in the same way the crew of the Nova Scotia schooner had collectively decided to tie the wrong knot and see what happened. "How long?" she said. She meant it precisely. I understood that. 6 years, I said. "Give or take a month." She was quiet for a moment, not the silence of surprise. Something more careful than that, like someone who had been holding a weight for a long time and was only now deciding to put it down. "I thought it was closer to 4, she said. I was off. There it was. I turned my head. She was already looking at me. The tent was dark, but not completely. Enough ambient light that I could see her face. The expression on it was the one I had been reading wrong for 6 years. Or rather, I had been reading it correctly and then explaining to myself why it couldn't mean what it looked like it meant. "You knew," I said. "I suspected." She held my gaze. Steady, the way she was. I didn't want to be wrong about it. And I didn't want to be right about it and then have you decide it wasn't worth the risk. That would have been... She stopped. Chose a different word. Harder. "I wasn't deciding it wasn't worth the risk," I said. "I was deciding I couldn't afford to lose what we had." "I know," she said it quietly. "I was deciding the same thing, which means we were both deciding to keep something instead of getting something better, and we were both wrong. The rain shifted, came down a different way for a moment, sideways, drumming the rainfly unevenly, then settled. "What do we do?" I said. She thought about it for a moment with the seriousness she brought to things that deserved seriousness. "I think we sleep," she said. "And in the morning when it's light and we've slept and we're not making decisions at 2 a.m. in a tent in the rain, we talk about what we want. And if what we want is different?" She looked at me like I had just made an argument she found charming in its wrongness, like the man who had tied the wrong knot and was surprised about the anchor. "Daniel, we have spent 6 years wanting the same things on every other subject. I think we can figure this one out too." I thought about the schooner. About 17 chances. About the math I had been running for 6 years and had always stopped one step short of completing. Okay, I said. She settled back against her bag. Good. A minute passed. Maybe two. Sadie, I said. I'm glad your tent leaked. A pause. And then, very quietly, she laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one. The kind she only gave things that actually earned it. Owen shifted slightly in his sleep, settled, went still again. Go to sleep, she said. I did. Owen was already outside when I woke up, making coffee over a camp stove, humming something I couldn't identify. The rain had stopped. Light was coming through the rainfly in the pale, particular way it does at altitude after a storm, cleaner than usual, like the air had been rinsed. Sadie was awake. She was looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone who had been awake for a while and had not been wasting the time. She looked over when she heard me move. Hi, she said. Hi. I've been thinking. What about? She propped herself up on one elbow. I think we should go on a date. A real one. Not a dinner with the group where we end up at one end of the table together and pretend it's coincidental. An actual date. Where I dress up and you pick a place and we both know what it is going in. Something settled in my chest. The structural equivalent of a calculation coming out clean. I can do that, I said. And I think, at some point, not tonight, not this week, I want you to tell me all the things you've been not saying. I have a feeling there are a lot of them. There are a fair number. Good. She said it simply. Like a woman who had come to a decision and was at peace with it. Like someone who had walked into a room, understood the temperature, and decided she was staying. I have time. What I did not tell you about the morning, before Owen started making coffee, before the light came through the rainfly, there was a stretch of maybe 20 minutes where I lay there completely awake and thought about everything that could still go wrong. She was still asleep, or near enough. Her breathing was even, her face slack and turned slightly toward me, and I lay very still and had the thoughts that come at 5 in the morning in the aftermath of something important, the ones that sound like good sense. What if she had said what she said because it was 2 a.m. and she was tired and cold? What if the words between us felt different in daylight, in regular clothes, over coffee on a camp stove? What if I had been so far inside my own need for this to be real that I had heard something true in something she had said for entirely different reasons? I was on my third pass through this when she said, without opening her eyes, "You're doing the math again." I looked at her. "I can tell," she said, still not opening her eyes. "You get quiet in a specific way when you're second-guessing something." "I'm not second-guessing. You are a little bit." I considered denying this. Maybe a little bit. She opened her eyes then, finally, and looked at me with the directness she had that could sometimes feel like being caught. I know what I said. I know why I said it. It was dark and raining, and I'd been carrying it for a long time. A pause. The dark and the rain didn't make me say it. They just made it impossible to not say it. I looked at her for a moment. Something in my chest that had been very carefully arranged for 6 years quietly rearranged itself. "Okay," I said. "Okay." She closed her eyes again. "Now let Owen make coffee. I can hear him thinking about it." We stayed 2 more days. The weather cleared and held the way it sometimes does after a storm in the mountains. Generous, overcompensating, as though trying to apologize for the night before. We hiked the second ridge. We made the food that had been too ambitious the first evening. The 6 of us sat around the fire both remaining nights until it burned low enough that we were mostly just sitting in the dark together, which is a particular kind of contentment that requires the right people and nowhere you have to be. Owen caught me alone that second afternoon, on the trail down to the creek. He had the expression of a man who had been awake longer than he had let on. "I woke up," he said. "For the record, I figured." When she came in, he paused. "I wasn't going to say anything. I know. But I want you to know I've been waiting for this for approximately 4 years and I feel personally vindicated." I looked at him. He was very pleased with himself. He had every right to be. "Thank you, Owen. Any time." He clapped me on the shoulder and kept walking. The date was 3 weeks later. She wore something simple and well chosen, and I picked a restaurant I had thought about carefully, the kind of place where the lighting was low and the menu did not use too many adjectives, and the tables were spaced far enough apart that you could have a real conversation. We sat across from each other for 3 hours. We talked about things we had never talked about directly. Things we had circled for years and always veered away from at the last moment. The way you steer away from a conclusion you're not ready to land at. I told her, that night, the first layer of the things I had been not saying. She listened without interrupting, which is something she did well. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's the one I was waiting for." I did not ask which part she meant. I didn't need to. 2 months after that, washing dishes at her apartment on a Tuesday night, not a special occasion, not a planned moment, just a Tuesday, she said without looking up from the sink, "I've been in love with you for most of the time you've been in love with me. I just did the same math you did and got the same wrong answer." I put down the dish towel, she handed me a pan to dry. "Different starting point, same conclusion," she said. "We were both idiots." 17 chances, I said. She looked over, the corner of her mouth. "Exactly." 6 months after the tent, I drove back up to the Cascades alone. Found the same site. The fire ring was still there. The creek was louder in spring. I stood there for a while, in the spot where Owen's tent had been, in the spot where two people who had spent 6 years getting very good at not saying things had finally run out of patience with their own silence. I had a ring in my jacket pocket. I was going to propose the following weekend, at a dinner I had already planned and was not telling her about. She was going to say yes before I finished the question. I knew this the way you know a calculation is going to come out right before you've finished running it. A feeling in the structure of the thing. But I wanted to stand in that spot first. I wanted to acknowledge the geometry of it, the exact ground where something that could have gone wrong finally went right. 17 chances, she had said, reading about the schooner. Those men had 17 chances. Each one looked obvious in retrospect. Each one had felt, in the moment, like something they would deal with later. I had somewhere around 2,000 chances of my own. 2,000 mornings and dinners and car rides and campsites where I had looked at the calculation and decided I would deal with it later. She had the same 2,000 from the other direction. I stood there and thought, we used the 2001st. We got it right on the 2001st. Have you ever spent years not saying something to someone you trusted completely? Not because it wasn't true, but because the truth felt like too much to risk. And when you finally said it, did they already know? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.